All right, welcome everybody to a special episode of Under the Dome tonight. Week 3 of the off season. I'm your host, Alan Ulrich, and my partner Sean Williams is unavailable this week. So rather than postpone the show, rather than just put it off till next week, we got our semi-regular guest, Mr. Bob Rose, in from beautiful downtown Pittsburgh, here to chime in. How you doing tonight, Bob?
I'm pretty good, Alan. How about you?
Not too bad. Not too bad. It's the kind of the dull point of the season right now. Free agency's not for another couple of weeks, and everything's just guessing. And it's the equivalent of pulling out the Sears and Roebuck Christmas wish book and looking at the pictures, going, "Oh, I really want that. Oh, I really want that. That looks awesome." And I don't realize it's advertised, and it makes it look so good. So we'll talk a little bit about free agency today, and we'll talk mainly about the offense this time around. We'll mention a couple things on defense, but it seems that offense is the biggest need right now for the Saints this offseason. But first, I want to make sure, not that I don't pay attention to when Sean's talking, but because I do, but he says it so often that I kind of just tune him out. You know, that sounds terrible, but I do. So let me pay the bills. Want to thank Fan First Productions for sponsoring the show, as always. So you can subscribe to our show on iTunes and on YouTube. And basically, we want to thank you for being a part of everything we do. Thank you guys for watching us, listening to our foolishness. We'll even talk a little bit about music again. I don't know how Bob's going to feel about that. We'll talk a little bit about music again because I've seen some of the feedback. They're like, "Man, I like when you guys just kind of go off on the wrestling tangents and the music tangents. It's kind of fun hearing that rather than just, even though we come to you all for football, it's nice to see kind of a more well-rounded show." So we will talk a little bit about that too. But first, Bob, I know you're getting right back into the swing of things with writing. You've got a couple pieces out right now, breaking down the Saints season position by position. You talked about the quarterbacks, running backs, and tight ends, and I think the offensive line, and you've got receivers coming up next. Without spoiling your article for tomorrow, what do you think are the biggest needs this offseason offensively?
It all centers around what happens with Mark Ingram and his contract. As most may know, Ingram is slated to become an unrestricted free agent whenever the start of the new season begins in the I think it's the second week of March or end of the first week. Mm-hmm. The Saints need to re-sign Ingram. I think that should be number one on their offseason priority list. If Ingram manages to hit the open market, they stand a good chance at losing him because he is one of the more underrated backs in the NFL. He's an every down guy. He can pick up yardage in between the tackles. He has the athleticism to make plays in the open field. He's an underrated pass catcher and an outstanding blocker and blitz pickup. And so I think if he hits the open market, the Saints aren't going to get into a bidding war. They're not in a position to get in a bidding war with anybody. So they would be wise to try to lock him down for a 2 to 3 year contract before that happens. If they lose Ingram, and I'd put the odds at about 60-40 that they're able to keep him right now. If they lose Ingram, the running back becomes maybe not number one on the offseason priority list, but certainly within the top 3 or 4 needs. Because Alvin Kamara showed that he could take on the responsibilities of an every down back. But in my opinion, he wore down a little bit towards the end of the season because of the early year workload. So while Kamara can do it, that kind of handcuffs the Saints offense too, because they're not able to move him around the formation quite as much if he's the number one running back. And I think that's where he's the most effective. So I talked a little bit about that. The pieces you're alluding to, Alan, through the Canal Street Chronicles. I'm doing off-season position grades right now. And by the way, I ranked or graded running back. I gave them a B. I think Ingram and Kamara are probably the two most dynamic tandem of running backs that this league has seen in quite some time. But I did mention the possibility of what happens if they lose a Mark Ingram in free agency. And there's some names out there. That we could make an interesting pickup. Latavius Murray out of Minnesota might be a decent pickup. I like C.J. Anderson if the Rams let him hit free agency again. I know that brings up some awful recent memories for some Saints fans, but C.J. Anderson can still play as long as he doesn't have to carry on the full workload, which he wouldn't. Whoever they bring in to potentially replace Ingram, they wouldn't be expected to be a 20 to 25 carry a game guy. They're a complementary piece. Shenderick West and Spencer Ware out of Kansas City. And TJ Yeldon out of Jacksonville could all be unrestricted free agents too. And I think any of those guys would be decent fits for the Saints. Outside of that, and I'm sorry I interrupted you a couple times.
No, not at all.
Now go on.
I was just going to say I agree with your grading. I think it's a B. I thought Ingram had a down year, in part because of the 4-game suspension, and I thought he also never really got that traction of that he seemed to pick up about mid-season last year, where he was starting to get 100-yard games, and he was starting to become that kind of closer back to go out there and just really take over a game when everyone expects you to run, and you're running and you're still getting positive yards. One of the things that people kind of miss about Ingram when they underestimate his ability, Ingram was our best screen pass catcher. For whatever reason, Kamara, as good of a receiver as he is, it may be a timing issue. He just struggles running the screen properly compared to Ingram. And I think that's something that will be missing if we lose Ingram. We have a hard time replacing. And I agree with you. I think there was a time, and it coincided with the 4-game or the losing streak that we had with the Dallas Cowboys, and games where our offense didn't look nearly as explosive. That Kamara looked kind of worn down. He wasn't nearly as explosive. It picked up again towards the end of the season and in the playoffs, but in those games, the Dallas game, the Carolina game, Kamara just didn't look as sharp as I expected him to look, especially compared to last year. So, yeah, we do need a second back. And I also agree with you as far as the matchup problems that Kamara presents. If he is the only running back in the offense, it's a lot harder to move him around and use him in the multiple ways that the Saints do if there's no threat of a real running threat behind Breeze in the offense. So all those points are very valid. Let me ask you this. As far as the offensive line, we've heard a lot about Andrus Pete's $9 million cap figure this year because he's in the final year of his original rookie deal. I've speculated that the Saints should extend him to make it a more cap-friendly deal to buy us some more salary cap room to sign some other offensive players. How would you grade the offensive line? A lot of people want to see Pete go, but how would you grade the rest of the offensive line? Because there's some questions I want to ask you after this.
I think I would give them around a B as well. They were playing some A plus football through the first half, through 2/3 of the season, and then some the injuries, particularly to Pete and Teron Armstead on the left side. They took a toll. And the losing streak that you mentioned a little earlier, the Dallas, the Carolina games, where the offense really struggled. I think those struggles started up front. Jermon Bushrod played well in the first couple games in replacement of Armstead, but then he got nicked up himself. And let's face facts, Bushrod, for as brilliant a career as he had, he was playing out He was much closer to the end than he was the prime.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where I think that Pete is an underrated commodity on this Saints offensive line. He was drafted to be a tackle. And, as we saw in his first year and a half to 2 years, his best position is certainly not tackle. He's not as quick on his feet as he should be to deal with some of the more elite edge rushers. And see, Will agrees with that. But Pete found a home when they moved him inside at guard, where he's one of the more underrated guards in the league, in my opinion. But where Pete's value lies is when Armstead, not if, unfortunately, but when Armstead gets hurt and has to miss a couple of games, Pete is capable of sliding outside into either tackle spot, really, and holding his own for a couple games as long as it's not a long-term fix. And I think the Saints recognize that, even in 2017 when they really penned Pete in for that guard position, and you saw the offensive line really flourish. Now, that $9 million cap hit that you talk about, that's big. And I think if they don't manage to extend Pete, or if he isn't willing to restructure during an extension, I think he could even be potentially a cap casualty. One of those June 1st. I'm not aware of how his contract sets up or what kind of savings that would give the Saints, but I think that it's entirely possible. We don't want to see that happen. I know Andrus Peat draws some ire from a lot of Saints fans because when he does struggle, it's at the forefront. He looks like a revolving door sometimes, especially outside at tackle. But you need somebody with that kind of versatility. That's that kind of experience at playing so well inside at guard. So I'm hoping that they're able to restructure. On the other side, Ramczyk and Morford, the right tackle and right guard, they're as solid as they come. I defy anybody to put up a better right side of the offensive line. So they're solid there. Armstead's one of the best left tackles in the game when he can stay on the field. So this is an A+ offensive line when all five are together. But there's a couple question marks, certainly, as you mentioned.
Okay, so that's going to lead to my next question. What do you think, or how would you grade as an individual Max Unger? Did Max Unger seem to grow old during the season? Because he seemed like that to me. I thought just like the rest of the offensive line, and it could be the injuries to Pete, it could be the injuries to Armstead and Bushrod fading as the longer he had to stay out there. But it seemed like there was times, especially in the playoff game with the Eagles and also in the Dallas game and the first Carolina game and even to an extent the Pittsburgh game, where Max Unger seemed to have a handful of just plays where he got pushed around and pushed back in the backfield. How would you kind of grade Max Unger?
Individually, I'd give him a C at best. And the words you used, growing old before our very eyes, I think that's entirely accurate. He is the elder statesman of that starting five. I think he's 32. I'm going to be 33 by the time the season starts. And Max's strength has always been he has been a very technical performer. He's not going to overwhelm anybody with his power. He's not the most fleet of foot, although he does have some nice quickness to his feet. But he's always been a very technical center, and he was getting beat a lot, looking foolish really. And at that position, especially with a quarterback, like Breeze, who is listed at 6'1", and of 6'1", 6'2", and of shorter stature. You laugh, you know the way those listings work.
Yeah. Just out of curiosity, just for the record, my daughter was frequently listed as 5'7" in the basketball programs. She's closer to 5'4". So we would always laugh because that was her ideal height, to be 5'7". She wanted those 3 inches, but it just didn't work out that way. So yeah, I get a laugh out of that. So
But yeah, Max, I'll put it this way. I was shocked when the Pro Bowl voting was initially announced, and we all kind of, those of us that cover the league, like yourself and Sean and myself, we always kind of roll the eyes at the Pro Bowl voting. But I was actually shocked when Max Unger was legitimately voted into the Pro Bowl. And that's more of a career achievement kind of thing for Max, I think, at this point. But of that starting five, if all five are healthy, Max Unger is the liability, and he's under contract until next year too. I've gone on record as saying that I kind of expect him to be a cap casualty because they have Will Clapp and Cameron Tom both capable of playing either a guard or a center position, and let's say if Unger and or Pete are no longer on the roster by the time the next season comes around, the position, well, the offensive line in general is certainly going to have to be addressed because, to plug in either Clapp or Tom to play, I think that they could capably fill those spots. Let's say Unger at center, if he's released, by pulling Clapp or Tom off of the bench to fill that spot, I don't think you lose much in your starting five, but you lose a key depth performer. So I do think it's time to move on from Max Unger and let Clapp and Tom kind of duke it out for that starting center spot, and let whoever comes on the short end of that competition be sort of your inside swing man off of the bench to give you some depth.
Yeah, that's where I was kind of going with this, and one of the reasons why you mentioned the fact that Pete can play both tackle and guard because we've had so many injury problems with Armstead, and we don't have the depth right now. I think that's why they would probably want to extend Pete into a cap-friendly deal that gives him some flexibility, because they don't want to risk, losing the Pete and then probably losing Unger within the next year without having significant depth build up in the offensive line. So it's going to be interesting to see how the Saints approach this. I think they're going to try and squeeze one more year out of Unger, and see if they can get something for Pete. See if they can get a good contract for Pete, because of the two, I think Pete would go first because he has the least amount of cap hit. I think they save money, all $9 million, because it's a rookie deal. I think they save all $9 million in the cap. I have to go back and look at over the cap website to make sure. But regardless, they would like to keep this offensive line together, but they have some issues they're going to have to address. They're going to have to address life after Armstead. They're going to have to address life after Unger, and I think Cameron Tom has the edge on that. Where Will Clapp fits in all this, I don't know yet. So, yeah, and I agree totally. I think Ryan Ramczyk not making the Pro Bowl was a huge oversight. I would have put him in the Pro Bowl above almost everybody on that line except for Armstead, and Armstead only because of his injury. I don't think he deserved to go. But Ramczyk is probably one of the best offensive right tackles in the league.
Yeah, he absolutely is. And I think the Saints are fortunate because there's not too many teams that can claim bookend offensive tackles at the skill level and use. Both these guys are in their prime that Armstead and Ramczyk are capable of doing.
Okay, so let me ask you this question now. We talked about the offensive line. We talked about running backs. The elephant in the room, Teddy Bridgewater. What do the Saints do with him? And what do you think is life going to be like for Drew Brees over the next couple of years? Do you think this is his last hurrah? Or do you think he's going to try and play for the next 2 or 3 years?
Wow. And I don't even know which to address first because one kind of begets the other. Here's the thing with Teddy. I think the Saints coaching staff like him. In fact, I know they do. They were really impressed at how well he seemed to pick up the offense after they brought him in. Because remember, he played the entire preseason and training camp with the New York Jets. They didn't bring him in until just before the start of the regular season.
Exactly.
Teddy's only, I think, 27, maybe 28 years old. yet he does have starting experience. He seems to be fully physically recovered from that horrific knee injury 2 years ago with Minnesota, 3 years ago now with Minnesota. I don't know personally if I feel confident in Bridgewater's capability to run a Sean Payton offense, to run it to its full capacity. Now, I'm not the one that gets paid to make that decision, I realize. You got to think that Teddy will want to be a starter somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
But you look throughout the league, there aren't really a lot of starting quarterback positions that pop right off of the paper at you. And the ones that do are teams that are going to in a position to draft a quarterback in this draft, or already have a young signal caller that they're planning on plugging in. So in other words, Teddy is not really going to get much of a starting opportunity there. If he does, it's only going to be as a bridge quarterback. Meanwhile, trying to look at it from his perspective, you're sitting and you're looking at a 40-year-old quarterback in Breeze. We already know that Breeze has got one more year in him. I kind of think he's gunning to play 2 more years, although he only has one more year on his current deal. If Teddy, putting myself in Teddy's shoes, if he believes that Breeze is going to be one more and done, and that starting quarterback job is now mine, Teddy Bridgewater's, I'm probably more inclined to sign another 1-year deal with New Orleans at a fairly reasonable cap hit, knowing that they're going to need to throw money at me to keep me as a starting quarterback once Breeze steps away. Having said that, I think the Saints are probably going to let Bridgewater test the open market to see what kind of offers he gets. They're probably have probably been talking to him and his agent behind closed doors, talking about this exact kind of scenario, because there's no secret. Breeze, even if Breeze has 2 years left, that's on the high side. So the Saints are going to need a bona fide starting quarterback sooner rather than later. So Teddy Bridgewater has an opportunity to be the starting quarterback of the New Orleans Saints before he's 30 years old, with not a lot of mileage on him. The last couple of years he has been a backup. He sat out that 1 year with the injury. So it's not like he's going to be an old 29 or 30. So I think they'll let him probably test the open market, see what kind of offers he gets. If he gets an offer that wows him, not only financially, but professionally, as far as an opportunity to be an immediate and perhaps a long-term starter, then you let Teddy go, and then you start from the drawing board, or start from scratch as far as life after Breeze. I think that's kind of where that stands. But again, Alan, I don't see a lot of opportunity for Teddy Bridgewater to be a long-term starter elsewhere. Nobody off the top of my head, really, now that Cleveland has finally answered their quarterback situation.
Yeah. The teams I can see where Bridgewater had an opportunity to start. Jacksonville's one that comes to mind immediately. Miami is another. Perhaps the Giants. Now you're really starting to reach for some. What happens in Oakland? What happens in, Denver made a move already, but what happens in Tennessee, even though they got Mariota, Mariota's injured a lot. Do they stick with Mariota, or do they try and bring in some competition to see if they could? They had a playoff run this past year, and Mariota did not finish that last game, and they missed the playoffs because of it. So there are some places, but unless a Jacksonville or Giants or a team like that makes an offer for Bridgewater, I agree with you. His options are extremely limited. I really thought he was going to be a good match in Denver prior to that trade. I really thought that signing. I really thought John Elway would take a chance with him and see if he could run that offense. And instead, they made their move. So I don't know. I would, if I were the Saints, I'd have a 2-year deal in my pocket because I do think, regardless of what happens next year, I think this is Brees' last year coming up. And I only say that because of things that Drew had said during the season, coupled with the move to trade for Bridgewater just at the end of preseason. Something inside of me told me that for that move to make sense, Drew Brees must have gone over to talk to Loomis and Peyton and said, you know what, this is my last training camp. My kids are getting older. I want to enjoy them while they're little. I'm having fun coaching their flag football league. I want to start thinking about life after football. This is my last run. And then during the season, when we saw shots of Brees in the locker room, he was saying things to the teams like, this is why I came back. And this is what I want to do. And then to have the season end the way it did, and we're not going to rehash that again.
Thank you.
Yeah, but to look at Drew during the season, during those 2 weeks leading up to the Super Bowl, I have seen Brees. Brees is annoyingly optimistic, as he likes to put it. All of that optimism was really missing in his face the whole time he was there and he skipped the Pro Bowl, which he never does. He enjoys that part because in his mind, I don't know how many of these I have left, but he skipped it this year. And I think it really this was going to be his last year where he walked off the field probably a champion. When he the way he was saying, well, we're just going to have to go one more time. I'm just going to have to try and get in one more time. That's the kind of stuff that tells me that this is probably his last go around. And I think Bridgewater knows that. Bridgewater's agent knows that. The Saints brass knows that. So they probably will make an offer, probably a 2-year deal, cap friendly this year, next year with a little more money, a lot of incentives. And if you play and break all these incentives, then we're going to hit you with the big deal, if for 2020. And if not, if Bridgewater turns out to be a glorified game manager, the Saints go 7-9, and it looks like the quarterback issue is a problem, they protected themselves because the 2020 draft class is very deep and very good. Yeah. Given just the names I can think of off the top of my head who will probably be in there.
Yeah, and there's I think you and I had this conversation even heading into this last season. The records mean something. These all-time records, they mean something to Drew. Not as much as his teammates, and not as much as the wins and the potential championships. But yeah, they mean something as far as his legacy goes. We all knew he was going to get the completion record and the time yardage record. Now he's gotten the touchdown record in his sights, which he will break this coming season. Now, whether Tom Brady catches him or not remains to be seen. But Brees, at the very least, is going to be a record holder of all 3 of those highly prestigious records. So I never really, barring a Peyton Manning fall off of a cliff this past year, which we didn't see out of Drew, I never thought that this was going to be his last year. I'm more inclined to agree with you. I think he's shooting for, has been shooting for 2019, 2020 as his probable last year, unless something crazy happens. So, at the end of the day, I think you and I are in agreement. I think the Saints probably look at it this way. They wouldn't have made that move for Teddy Bridgewater this last year, giving up a 3rd-round pick for a 1-year rent a backup.
Yeah.
And you could, I know what they were saying. Well, we needed to fortify that backup quarterback spot. Yeah, that's all fine and dandy. But you look at how durable number 9 has been. That couldn't have been on your top list of concerns unless he had an off-season injury, which he did not. So they made that move last September or late August, fully with this contract coming up. And unless Bridgewater disappointed them in the locker room and in the film room and behind closed doors, and there's no indication that he had, that now is when I could see what you're saying, a 2-year, maybe even a 3-year deal with kind of an option for that 3rd year. That way, each party is protecting their own back. Bridgewater has his contract. He has his starting opportunity, with the potential, if he plays well, to get a long-term deal with a young roster around him, potentially ready to compete for a championship during his tenure as a quarterback as well. While the Saints have protected their interest and not necessarily putting themselves in cap hell by throwing a whole lot of money at an unproven free agent. This guy's been in the locker room. He knows the team. The coaches know him. But if it doesn't work out, you're not in cap hell. You can start from the drawing board and just find another quarterback, probably a young draft choice, like you said.
Yeah. I'm curious to see how 2019 plays out, because if Bridgewater walks, it's not the end of the world for me. Because again, I like the 2020 draft class. You have your full slate of draft picks as of now. So I know you never know what these guys are going to do, but you have your full slate of draft picks, and you have an opportunity. And I think Taysom Hill, the fun that was Taysom Hill this past year, Taysom Hill, I think they feel confident enough to be a backup, to play kind of a just don't screw it up and wreck the car kind of offense. If you had to play him for an extended period, but I think they feel confident enough with him running the offense and doing some things on offense that they can trust him to be a backup to close out a game. Fill in for an injury, maybe for a game or so, but not long-term solution.
Right.
So, there wouldn't be that panic move that if Bridgewater leaves, oh my God, we have to sign somebody right away. We have to get somebody in here. I don't think they have that attitude. I think their attitude purely is Bridgewater may or may not be our future quarterback. We'll have to see. We'll see what we can get for him. If we can get him cheap enough and he is willing to stay, then he's our future. But he's not. It's not a must sign like a Mark Ingram. I think Mark Ingram is a must sign.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about the offensive line. We talked about the running backs. Talked about the quarterback, wide receiver. Without going too much into your article tomorrow, we know what we have at Michael Thomas.
Mm-hmm.
Probably one of the best receivers in the league. But after that is a huge drop-off. Something we have not seen in a Sean Payton offense that I can think of, arguably since 2006 with Marcus Colson's breakout season. Except we don't have a young Devery Henderson on the other side. So how would you grade the receiving core?
There's 3 different grades for this receiving core. Michael Thomas, he's an A+. I mean, if he wasn't the best wide receiver in the NFL this last year, I'll put it, the line I used in my article that's coming out tomorrow morning is that many people mention Julio Jones, Antonio Brown, Odell Beckham on the short list of the best receivers in the NFL. If you don't put Michael Thomas in with that group as being as good as or better than them, then you just simply don't know football. So Michael Thomas is an A+. The rest of the receiving core, their performance this last year, they performed at a D level. I'm not saying that is their skill level, but that's the way they performed, and I'll get into that in a minute. So the way I graded the receiving core, I think I gave them either a C or a C+ in my article, because A+ and D average out to a C. So the receiving core as a whole average at best. And we saw this, and you and I, or me and Sean have had many conversations during the course of the season. That Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara, they were this team's passing offense. And outside of them, they're just the drop off in the production was downright frightening. And you're absolutely right. We have never seen this out of a Sean Payton team. You've always had multiple threats, if not at wide receiver, then at least pass catcher. Jimmy Graham, Jeremy Shockey, Lance Moore, Devery Henderson, Willie Snead, Brandon Cooks, Marcus Colston, et cetera, et cetera. We get the idea. And this year it was Michael Thomas, Alvin Kamara, or throw the ball away and punt. It was absolutely astonishing. Where does the answer lie? Obviously they need at least one threat to take the defensive focus away from Thomas and Kamara. Is it with a Ted Ginn? And Ted Ginn, if you're going to individually grade his performance this year, you got to give him an incomplete because he missed that big chunk of games with that knee injury. And that offense was starting to get back on track once he was back in the lineup because he gave them that deep threat again. But is the answer another year of Ted Ginn when he's going to be 34 years old, I think? That's dangerous to count on. We did see some good things out of Traquan Smith and Keith Kirkwood both, and I think that both players have a bright future in the league. But you got to count on a rapid development from them. Again, could they potentially do it, either or both? Yeah, but it's dangerous to count on. Now, what about Cameron Meredith? Meredith had an extremely disappointing year. He was not obviously recovered from that knee injury that ended his year with the Chicago Bears the year before. But unless the Saints cut him this offseason, Meredith is under contract to come back next year. And before that knee injury, Meredith showed himself to be one of a potentially very good, if not Pro Bowl caliber intermediate target. Which really, that's all this team needs. They don't necessarily need a whole team of deep threats, just another target to take that focus away. So does the answer lie on the roster? I like the pieces that they have in place, but I would really, really like to see the Saints bring in another second tier veteran with some good experience and production out of the slot. And not only a second-tier veteran in free agency, but I'd like to see them nail another pick late in the rounds of a draft, which Sean Payton and Mickey Loomis are prone to do.
Well, and I see we have Sean trying to join in on the conversation here, and he's having some issues right now. Go
home, Sean.
You thought you were going to take over. You're trying to corner the market and
I even shaved.
Sean didn't.
I'm hiding.
Didn't. I see
I'm
that.
hiding. You don't think that we're going to do a Tuesday night without me, man? I got to lower my voice though because I work for some excellent guys, some excellent bosses, and I just wanted to number one. Alan, did you? I haven't been able to catch the whole show.
I have not mentioned it yet. That was going to be at the end of the show as a teaser to set it up. But go ahead and reveal it.
Oh man, I'm sorry, I blew it.
No, you're good.
We have a very, very, very special guest joining us next Tuesday night on Under the Dome. This is and first of all, I want to thank John Butler. Part of the New Orleans Saints syndicate. But I am very, very pleased to announce that next Tuesday night at 8 p.m., Under the Dome will be welcoming the best outside linebacker that the New Orleans Saints have ever had. Pat Swilling is going to be joining us next Tuesday night on Under the Dome.
I got a great Pat Swilling story to tell. I've told it many times, but I've got a great Pat Swilling story to tell. I'll tell at the end of the show. But it involves Bill Parcells, and I just love story.
Yeah.
I love the story. I love telling this story because it's just so awesome.
I had a few minutes before things got real busy here. I wanted to number one, I wanted to thank my brother from another mother, Bob. You were a phone call away, and I needed you, and you came through. I love you, man. Thanks for covering for me. All the people that watch Under the Dome, Jerry, Anna, Chad, everybody, you guys rock. Thank you guys so much for your support. If anybody is in Northeast Louisiana on Saturday night, let me know. There's something that you got to see and check out. We're going to be blowing the place up. Coon-Ass Carnival. You guys are absolutely nailing it. Teddy Bridgewater will not be a saint. This is going to be Drew's last year, win, lose, or draw. Mark Ingram, we must sign. And Michael Thomas. Michael Thomas absolutely put Antonio Brown to shame as a wide receiver this year, and he's not shopping for a new employer. So, again, I'm gonna have to duck out of here. I wanted to thank Bob. I love you guys.
All right, Sean. Thanks for popping in. Oh, and please go to that special show that's coming up, Coon-Ass Carnival, because Sean sings. You get to hear Sean sing. It's a must-see TV. Did he cut out on me? I don't know if he cut out on me. He didn't respond to that. Okay. He really does. He really does sing. It's a band he's in. He plays bass and he will sing. So it is well worth the price of admission. Okay, so real quick, we're talking about receivers. I agree with you. I think a 34-year-old Ted Ginn is iffy at best. I think that, after that, Cameron Meredith is the only one you really want to work with, because I really think that Kirkwood is a borderline guy. I think Tommy Lee Lewis is done.
Yeah.
And, Traquan Smith, extremely disappointed in his season, especially after he had his breakout game against the Philadelphia Eagles, where you thought, okay, now you're going to start contributing. This was your opportunity. You took advantage of it. Cameron Meredith had just got put on IR, I believe, the week before. So this is your opportunity to shine. You took a step, caught 10 passes for over 100 yards, beautiful touchdown reception where you took a shot, and you just scored. What happened to you the rest of the year? You vanished. That can't stand. Your roster spot, and we have seen this through Sean Payton's tenure, just because you were drafted doesn't guarantee you any patience with Payton, and certainly not with CJ. If you don't produce, you don't step up, you're not on the roster. We'll find somebody who looks just like you to put in your spot. I mean, I hate to say, I'll tell you how my dad used to talk to me. You cut up, too. I'm going to get rid of you, make another kid look just like you, and put you in the place. Yeah. And I'll even name him Allen. It doesn't matter.
Traquan Smith has the physical tools to be a success. He has wonderful athleticism. He is dangerous with the ball in the open field. The problem I saw out of Traquan, he tends to get a little, and this was my draft analysis on him before the Saints even drafted him. He gets gun shy in a lot of traffic. He doesn't sift through the traffic well. It's not that he won't make the big catch over the middle, but he tends to get a little alligator armed. Kirkwood is the exact opposite. Kirkwood is everything that you want Traquan Smith to be. He is physical. He looks to make plays in traffic. He relishes the contact. If we could morph those two receivers into one, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Absolutely.
But both guys, Kirkwood's struggle is he needs to figure out a way to get a little separation. He's not a burner, so he's going to have to, and he's a good route runner anyway, but he's going to have to even run sharper routes to get some separation, at least in the intermediate parts of the field. Yep. So I think both of those guys, they can be tools to the Saints offense, but like you just said, and like we just said, it's kind of dangerous to count on. I'd like to see them bring in one veteran that they feel pretty confident in, and another young guy in the late rounds as an undrafted free agent to give competition.
Yeah, I'm kind of hooked up on hung up on Cole Beasley right now, mainly because what I want as a receiver right now, and I know he's a slot guy, and that's where we're talking about putting Cameron Meredith, but I think Cameron Meredith can also play outside.
Yeah.
Cole Beasley is your ideal Lance Moore kind of receiver the Saints need just to move the chains. My God, how many times did we see the Saints have to rely on some kind of trick play or some kind of, I don't know how to describe it other than, something that you would expect. Hey, we can pick up this first down. It's 3rd and 3, 3rd and 4. We can pick up this first down. But they have to rely on a gimmick play with Taysom Hill or some kind of pitch they do to Kamara or something like that, instead of just throwing a quick slant to a sure-handed slot receiver like a Cole Beasley. That's where Lance Moore used to make his living a lot of times with the Saints. And yes, I think we need to upgrade from Ted Ginn as a speed receiver on the outside. I like to see that come out of the draft. I'm not sure where that's going to come out of. I know a lot of people are in love with Antonio Brown from the Steelers because, shove the personality aside, skills-wise, he is what you want as an ideal number 2 guy next to a borderline 1A guy you want to have next to, someone like a Michael Thomas. But the problem is you got that personality too. You've got a diva. And this is a team that does not need divas, that does not tolerate divas.
No.
So, and we were talking about this off the air. Your impressions of of Antonio Brown?
He's a piece of garbage, and I mean as a human being.
Yeah,
he is the very definition of a locker room cancer. This is a player who would rather catch 10 balls and lose than catch 1 ball and win. And that's not an exaggeration. I live up here in Pittsburgh, hopefully for not much longer. But I do. So, I mean, we get, the Antonio Brown, Ben Roethlisberger soap opera, and they're each soap operas individually. It is absolutely ridiculous to see. These are a couple of 8-year-olds telling on each other to the teacher, and the teacher doesn't do anything. Now, that's another story inside of the Pittsburgh Steelers locker room. I don't want Antonio Brown on my team, period. I don't care if he plays for free. He will tear. And this Saints locker room is one of the strongest locker rooms in the NFL, if not the strongest, as far as leadership and camaraderie. He will tear that apart in less than a season. You mark my words. And like you and I were talking off of the air, it's a pipe dream for anybody that does want it to happen anyway. It will never happen. Antonio Brown, I think, is going to end up on one of the Bay Area teams. But I know you just kind of wanted me to vent my feelings about Brown more than anything else, because I've been chomping at the bit to do so. He and I have actually jabbed each other back and forth on Twitter a little bit before he actually blocked me last week. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a pat on the back when I'm a big enough ass to get blocked by somebody like Antonio Brown or vice versa. But no, I mean, I don't want this kind of personality on the team. Like you said, the Saints have never tolerated it. Now, Michael Thomas is an interesting personality in and of himself. He's almost the cousin of a diva in the way that he knows he's good. He wants to tell everybody how good he is, but it's not in a divisive manner. Yeah, it is still in a very much team way. Thomas is just as happy if he has 2 catches for 9 yards and his team wins, as he is when he has to contribute 10, 12, 14 catches for his team to win. And he is perfectly fine with both as long as his team wins. And you notice, notice the 2 personalities. Go back and watch a Steeler game where Antonio Brown has a big game, and he has had a lot of them. I'm not denying the man's skill set. Watch and see how many players really respond to him after a big play in a congratulatory way. It's always the same guys, usually fellow divas. You watch Michael Thomas, on the other hand. Michael Thomas is always one of the first to be up to one of his teammates when his teammates make a big play. That's a very telling thing to me. And I've been to both Saints training camp and Steelers training camp, and I see the same kind of things there. And I don't know of any more telling way to put the differences in the two teammates. And the word team does not exist in Antonio Brown's vocabulary. I'm convinced somebody would have to mail him an encyclopedia and a dictionary for him to be able to figure it out.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned, Michael Thomas is like a cousin of a diva, but his uncle was a diva. Yeah, his uncle was a diva. I mean, Keyshawn Johnson was very much a diva, and I think he kind of learned the lessons of the mistakes his uncle made. And I don't doubt that Keyshawn even told him that. Look, when I was at Tampa Bay, I really screwed up. Looking back, I was immature, and I made an ass out of myself there in Tampa. That situation with John Gruden was totally out of control, and a lot of it was my fault. And I think Thomas learned from that, and that's why he is the way he is. And absolutely, I mean, this offense goes through Michael Thomas. Make no mistake. One other receiver I'm interested in, and I believe you're the one that mentioned him. I was thinking about him the other day, and I think it was your column or maybe something you wrote on Twitter. But the San Diego, I'm sorry, I've been lost in the 70s right now in a Facebook group talking about Don Coryell. The Los Angeles Chargers have a receiver, Tyrell Williams. He is a 6'4", 205-pound speed threat, and we saw him against the Chiefs and also in the playoff games. I forgot who they beat in the first round already. Not against the Ravens, but it was against the Ravens. He sort of stepped up towards the end of the year and became a good, consistent receiving threat. Now, he also was an undrafted free agent, but I think getting someone with size and speed with good hands, he's only 27 years old, that is another receiver the Saints could look at where they don't have to necessarily break the bank to bring him in.
You're right. And I think you're referring to a column that Barry Hurst has had out there.
Oh, that's who it was. Okay, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Barry made some great points, though, in the article. The thing I worry about Tyrell Williams is he has gone on record as saying that he believes he's a number one receiver. Now, there's nothing wrong with having that kind of confidence in yourself. And despite a limited amount of production, and by that I mean over a short period of time, he does seem to have the ability. What I worry is that he is going to demand being paid as a number one receiver. And that's where this, again, just like with Mark Ingram, the Saints can't afford to get in a bidding war, especially at a position where they don't need a number one receiver. Now, if his market value drops, again, we keep talking about all these short-term contracts. If they could get someone like Tyrell in on, say, a two-year deal where he's really going to flourish and then make some huge money if he plays well after that contract is over. He won't continue to be a New Orleans Saint after that kind of contract, but the Saints would have gotten some use out of him in pursuit of a championship over the short term. I don't think the San Diego I did it too. I don't think the Chargers are going to be able to afford him because they already have two bona fide 1-2 receivers in Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. So I think Tyrell Williams will hit the open market. It's going to be interesting. He is one of those players that's either going to be grossly overpaid within the first few hours of free agency. But if he isn't gone by then then we could see, we could see the Saints maybe having a fighting chance at getting him.
Right.
Now, you mentioned Cole Beasley before, and I wanted the guy I'm about to mention. I wanted him last year, but Tampa locked him up on a restricted deal. But now he's going to be an unrestricted free agent. Is Adam Humphries. Lord knows Saints fans have seen a lot of him. Most of the same skill set that you mentioned that Cole Beasley could give to you, I think Adam Humphries could give to you. A couple other dark horses that I would love to see them kick the tires on as free agents. I know some people are mentioning Golden Tate. While he would be a great fit in this offense, they can't afford him. Someone like Jermaine Kearse. Someone like Jermaine Kearse would be great out of the slot and can play outside. And Chris Conley from Kansas City. He gives you the same kind of skill set that maybe a Ted Ginn could give, only he's a lot younger and probably going to come cheaply too. I think the Saints are going to add a receiver in free agency, though. I do agree.
Yeah, I like Connolly coming out of the draft a lot out of Georgia. So yeah, I was excited when the Chiefs got him, but I would like to see someone like him join the Saints. Because while we're talking about receivers, the next position. And we'll just kind of skim it because obviously there's so many question marks on it, and there's not many answers either. Tight end. Why I've been looking at size as far as receivers for that outside position is because the tight end position is so bad right now. We really missed out on a tight end this last draft, and it's just the way the draft fell. There's nothing else you can do about that. I'm disappointed that Ben Watson retired the way he had to with a kidney stone. He did not get a chance to play in that championship game, that Super Bowl. And behind Ben Watson, we really didn't have anything. Josh Hill is an adequate blocker. He's going to give you everything he's got, but it's not a whole lot. Dan Arnold was very, very raw, and you saw that throughout the season, where you might get a great catch out of him, but in the NFC Championship game, he drops a sure-handed touchdown. That was outside of the missed call. That was probably one of the biggest plays early in the game. That was a difference between being up by 10 points, being up maybe 14 points, whatever, early in that game instead of only being up 13. Yeah. You need someone who can make those catches. And if one more person tells me Drew Brees made Jimmy Graham, I'm going to, because I'm like, if Drew Brees made Jimmy Graham, then why the hell hasn't he made another Jimmy Graham out of anybody? But yeah, you're missing that consistent receiving threat at tight end. And whether that's a Jimmy Graham, whether that's a younger Ben Watson, we need someone who can catch the ball and move the chains. And if you cannot get it in the tight end position, you've got to find it in your receiving core. And that may mean bringing in two guys and drafting somebody, because it's very unlikely that the Saints will be able to take somebody like an Irv Smith Jr. out of Alabama. It's very unlikely you're going to get one of those great pass-catching tight ends, because that's what's in vogue right now in the league. And you saw that in last year's draft. Everybody wants a Travis Kelce. Everybody wants, a Jimmy Graham in his prime. They want that tight end, Rob Gronkowski. They want that tight end that can stretch the field, line up outside the numbers, and be more of a receiving threat than a blocker. And you just don't see those right now. This draft class is not nearly as deep as the one from last year. So I don't know where a tight end will come from to help upgrade this position.
I'll tell you, there are, unless they get locked up, before free agency or right as free agency hits, there are a handful of tight ends that I think would make great fits in New Orleans. I've heard some people mention it already, and I would love this kid. I've been following him since early in his career at Penn State. Jesse James. from the Pittsburgh Steelers. He's a solid blocker. And has nice athleticism in the open field. Good hands, can make a good catch in traffic. Still young. Two guys out of Baltimore, Max Williams and Nick Boyle. At least one of those guys are definitely going to hit the open market. Probably two, because the Baltimore drafted two tight ends in last draft. Boyle and Williams has had some durability issues. But when he is healthy, he is as good as anybody as far as the pass catching abilities. And Boyle is just a notch below him as far as athleticism. But he had production in Indianapolis before he went to Baltimore. And there's a couple other guys. I don't think Jared Cook from the Raiders, if the Oakland does let him hit the open market, somebody is going to throw a lot of money at him, and I don't think the Saints will be one of those teams. But someone like Jeff Swaim from the Cowboys, pretty athletically limited, but he makes plays in the open field. He had a good year for Dallas before he got hurt down the stretch last year. People have mentioned Tyler Eifert from Cincinnati. I wouldn't touch. Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't touch him.
He signs his free agent contract from the back of the ambulance because he is just not somebody who's going to. He has so many durability issues. He just needs to retire. I wouldn't touch him.
No. You and I are in complete agreement. But yeah, I mean, somebody like Max Williams, Nick Boyle, Jesse James, even a Clive Warford. He never really. I think the Raiders drafted him from Miami originally, but he was a real raw basketball player converted into a football player. He sounds familiar to a lot of Saints fans, I realize. But he never really had the coaching to develop. But teams keep taking a shot on him because of his athletic ability. Now, would you sign a Clive Warford saying, all right, this is our number one tight end right out of the get-go? No, because of how raw he truly is. But like you said, the tight end class, unless somebody like Irv Smith tumbles to them in the second round, or at least close enough where they can realistically move a couple spots to get him, we're not going to get a starting tight end out of this draft. So it's got to come from free agency. That's where we're going to see a major signing by the Saints, I think.
Let me ask you, since this is the unasked question from some people, Eric Ebron with the Indianapolis Colts. He was terrible in Detroit. The Detroit fans were taking his luggage with him to throw him out of Detroit, and yet he hooks up with Andrew Luck and becomes the player that Detroit thought they were drafting. Do the Colts, A, say franchise tag him to hold on to him, or B, if he does make it into the open market, is he worth somebody the Saints should take a look at?
A, if it's I'll address B first. B, if he does hit the open market, I think if you're the New Orleans Saints, you make a major move towards him. Because you and I just talked about some nice pieces that this team has at wide receiver, and that they could bring in some other pieces without spending a lot of money in free agency, and how they've hit on late round gems before. Tight end is a completely different monster because they have nobody. As you pointed out, Josh Hill is probably a great teammate, a great inline blocker, and makes a couple plays for you a year. Dan Arnold is a nice story and could make some eye-popping catches, but he is not a starting tight end either. You need to make a move to ensure that you have a number one tight end. You have a 40-year-old Drew Brees who we know will flourish with an intermediate and short-range target. He can make someone like Ebron. Yeah, I know what people have said, that Brees made Jimmy Graham and all that stuff. Brees could make somebody like Eric Ebron a perennial All-Pro, look like a perennial All-Pro. So I think you do spend the money on an Eric Ebron if he hits free agency. Problem is, if Indianapolis has a working brain cell in that front office,
right,
which I've questioned in the past, they won't let him hit free agency. They will do whatever it takes to lock him up beforehand, even if that means franchise tagging him.
I agree. I just wanted to throw that out there because I know that's a question people have.
Mm-hmm.
I know I've seen his name pop up a few times, and I kind of wanted to discuss it a little bit just to say that, yeah, they would have an interest in him, but a lot of teams have an interest in him, and the Colts would be incredibly stupid not to franchise tag him because you're trying to, especially with Frank Reich, that offense, he's trying to build an offense. You need that guy in there. And again, how I preface the whole conversation, every team is looking for a pass catching tight end. So, okay. So we kind of just cover the whole offense. And then next week when Sean comes back, if he comes back, we don't know. Depends on what happens. You know, he may end up with his band and end up on the road and everything else. No,
well, anybody that's going to volunteer to go to to be a headline act at a festival called Kunas, you always got to worry about their return. So if Sean doesn't return, I'm here for you.
There we go. But we'll talk about the defense next time around. And guys, as Sean talked about when he popped in for a few minutes, next week we will have as our special guest, Sack Man, as he was known back then in the Dome Patrol. Pat Swilling, number 56, coming on board. And real quick, for those who don't know the story, and I'll kind of use this to kind of close out the night. This is one of my favorite stories about Pat Swilling, and it really comes from Bill Parcells. And these are the kind of motivational techniques that Sean Payton learned from the master, Parcells. The New York Giants are scheduled to play the Los Angeles Rams, and they were, in fact, the Los Angeles Rams back then. Scheduled to play the Los Angeles Rams, and for whatever reason, Hall of Famer linebacker Lawrence Taylor had trouble with a tackle named Irv Pankey for the Los Angeles Rams. He just did not have a good game against this guy. And Pat Swilling used to beat him like a drum. He beat a lot of tackles like that, but Irv Pankey particularly, and Jim Everett. I know you've had Jim Everett on your show before. Jim Everett probably could testify that, my God, that man just came off like there was nobody in front of him.
He had.
Yeah. So one day, Lawrence Taylor enters the locker room. There's an airline ticket sitting on this bench, his little stool in front of the locker, and sees it, and it's a ticket for New Orleans. And he says, walks into Parcells' office, says, "What's this?" And Parcells, matter-of-factly, straightforward, says, "Listen, I want you to go down to New Orleans and go find a guy named Pat Swilling, and I want you to go down there and play New Orleans this week because we're playing the Los Angeles Rams, and send Pat Swilling up here because Pat Swilling doesn't have any trouble with Irv Pankey, but you do, evidently. So you guys don't even need to switch jerseys or anything. He wears the same damn number you do. Just send Pat Swilling up here because I want to win this ball game, and we need a guy who can rush the passer. So you go on down to New Orleans and let Pat Swilling take your job for this week." Well, Lawrence Taylor had a fuse about this short anyway, and that was without doing the cocaine. So you can imagine how Lawrence Taylor took that news. He stormed out, let a few F-bombs fly, stormed out, and of course that week he had a monster game Irv Pankey never knew would hit him. But it just showed you the level of respect that a guy like Pat Swilling had throughout the league. And I always love that because, you know, I've always felt, going back to the day that we drafted Ricky Jackson and of course, the Giants drafted Lawrence Taylor in an incredible draft class in 1981, that had Ricky Jackson gone to New York and had Lawrence Taylor go to New Orleans, that we would all be hearing about, instead of LT, RJ, because that's how good those linebackers were. And being in the New York market, you kind of got, and New Orleans being a small market, you kind of got overwhelmed with the Giants linebackers, Carl Banks, Harry Carson, you know, Lawrence Taylor, and you kind of the Saints linebacker core just kind of got, oh, yeah, those guys over there. The league respected them, but the media kind of treated them like, oh, yeah, that's those guys over there. So I'm looking forward to talking to Pat Swilling about the days in Dome Patrol and, how exciting it was to be on that team and how exciting it was to kind of establish New Orleans as a legitimate NFL team in an era of so many dominant outside linebackers like Lawrence Taylor, like Derek Thomas, and like playing with a Hall of Famer like Ricky Jackson. So I'm really looking forward to this. Please join us next week. Bob, I know you've got your articles coming out for tomorrow on the receiving corps from Canal Street Chronicles. What else you have in the works?
After the receiver grades, I'm going to grade each position group through the defense as well. And then all of us through the Canal Street Chronicles are hitting on year in review pieces for individual Saints players. And I know I have I drew the lucky straw to get Mr. Von Bell and Michael Thomas. So I'm looking forward to doing those pieces as well. And then we're going to start to do free agency previews, and then the always lovely mock drafts and everything like that afterward. We're going to take the week off again this week. Mr. Kyle Mosley and I are going to take the week off of the Bayou Blitz podcast, just between you and I and everybody that's listening. I think Kyle needs the vacation from me. I may or may not do a quick Facebook live show through the Bayou Blitz group tomorrow. I haven't decided yet. Depends on how I'm feeling, I suppose. But we're going to get right back on track with that Wednesday night podcast next week. And we have some exciting guests lined up too. I've reached out to Mr. Pat Swilling myself. I think you guys, me, and John Butler are all trying to burn up the phone lines for Ricky Jackson. And I have a few other guests lined up through the springtime. But all of us are coming out of our doldrums from the NFC Championship and starting to get back on track. But yeah, we're going to preview free agency. We're going to preview the draft. And then before you know it, in the blink of an eye, at least I hope, it's going to be summertime again, and we're going to be getting ready for training camp. So we have some exciting projects coming up.
Good deal. And reminder for everybody, I know the Bayou Blitz is off tomorrow, but what is your normal schedule time for the Bayou Blitz?
We're Wednesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern time and 8 Central. We could be listened live through the Spreaker app, which is a free app either through iPhone, through Apple or Android technology, or through www.saintspodcasts.com. And also, if you download the Spreaker app, and I think through the Saints Podcast site too, you can also listen to any of the past shows. I know we've had you and Sean on before. Mm-hmm. I want to get you on individually. I know you and I could talk football for hours and hours and hours. Absolutely. We've already done it. But yeah, we've had some, you guys and some other absolutely spectacular guests. We're coming up on 1 year of the Bayou Blitz. March 9th will be our 1 year anniversary. I can't believe it's been a year already. And I thank and love all you guys for all your support and everything you've done to help us get to this point. I think, Kyle and I have a lot of fun together, and we have a lot of fun doing the show. But yeah, that's every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 Central.
Absolutely. Well, great. As always, I am so glad that you are our unofficial third host on this show, because you are a tremendous wealth of information. Your writing is outstanding. It's a lot of fun to read your stuff on the Canal Street Chronicles. I look forward to seeing all that stuff. And as always, he is on Facebook. He is on Twitter. He is all over social media.
Track everywhere, and I'm full of it.
Yep. Track Bob down. I don't know if he's on Tumblr. I don't know if he's on Kick. Anything else. We're not going to get into that right now. But he is all over social media, so please find Bob Rose and follow his podcast. It's an excellent show. He did a great show with Jim Everett, so much so that I want Jim Everett on this show so badly because of that. as a fellow Purdue alum, I like to not that I went to Purdue, but I mean with him and Drew Brees, I love to hear his take on what he says about Drew Brees. It's great stuff. So anyway, thank you again, Bob, for joining us and being the fill-in host. I might have to get you to fill in for me one time. Let you and Sean go at it for a while. But as always, thank you guys. Sean will hopefully be back next week. And of course, even though we started on time, we still went a little long. But thank you as always for being on Under the Dome. And we'll see you next Tuesday night. Good night, everybody.